In the last video, we talked about how forms in Ionic are just like lists, but so far we've been focusing on just using input fields. Now, if you're familiar with HTML forms, you know that there are other types of elements that you can use in them. So for example, if we want to, we can add a text area field. So I'll do that. Let me go ahead and delete this inset sort of element here and just go with a first name and last name. And I'm going to add a label, and it's going to have a class of item and then item input. And I don't need this for right here. And all I need to do here is just add a text area, and I can create a placeholder attribute, and I'll call this comments here. So that gives you a comment section where you can type in longer pieces of text, and you can sort of resize this over here. And it looks pretty good, but nothing really special about creating text areas. You can also use things like checkboxes, and those are coded a little bit differently. So I'm going to add a div with a class of item and also item checkbox. So with checkboxes, you create sort of a container for the checkbox, and then you add the label inside it. And in the label is where we put the input field. And of course, this is going to be a checkbox. And what we want to do is add the label outside the label element, unlike what we've been doing before. So this will be a span with a class of input label, and we will call this rock star here. And that shows up not exactly right. We need to make sure that we add a class of checkbox here. And now it has this look and feel. So this is what a checkbox looks like in Ionic. They're coded a little bit differently. So I can add a divider here. So let's go ahead and add an item and an item divider here just to put a label here. So, and then I'm going to add some other ones here. And I'm just copying these and pasting new ones. All right, so you can see that checkboxes look a certain way. It's sort of a nice look and feel. If you want to, you can, of course, change the color just like you do with anything. And what you do is you add the checkbox energize or checkbox royal wherever you want to change the color. And for example, you have to do it right here in the div. So you would say checkbox energized here. And now this checkbox is yellow instead of the default sort of gray. We'll make this other one checkbox positive. So now we've got a yellow one and a blue one, and you can keep on going with colors. So radio buttons are sort of like checkboxes, except that they technically need to have the same name. So whenever you ask a question with a checkbox, you're asking an either or question. So I want to be a rock star, and perhaps you also want to be a music prodigy here. So that's a question that can have one or more answers. When you ask a question with a radio button, you're asking a question that can only have one possible answer. So let's go ahead and do a divider for this other question. And this question is going to be favorite social media network. Okay, so then what we want to do here is create a label with a class of item and item radio. So this should be pretty familiar to you by now. Just create a label. We put the item class, of course, item radio. Inside, we put in an input field with a type of radio. And we're going to give this one a name. We'll call this social. And then in here, we're going to create a div with a class of item content. And we'll call this one Facebook. And we'll save it. And you can see that right now you can select it. But what you want to do with radio buttons is actually give them an icon that shows up over here. So next to this, I'm going to add an I with a class of radio, icon, and also ion. social. And then the icon is usually a check mark, but you can use anything. So you can use one of the social icons. And that way, when somebody clicks on this or taps on it, it's going to have the icon over here on the right. So you can make it be any icon. And then what I'll do is I'll just copy this a few times. And of course, I'll just change the content. So right now, item radio, and it'll have the same name because it's the same question. But we want to change this from Facebook to Twitter. And I'll use the Ion Social Twitter. And then I'll use YouTube here. So whenever you ask this kind of question, you want to make sure that only one of these is a possible right answer. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this comments so we can see things a little bit better. And now you can see you can only answer one of these, but these you can answer all at the same time. All right, I'm going to get rid of the I want to be question because this is getting a little long. And next up, you can also create something called a toggle, which is similar to a checkbox, but it has a different function and it looks a little bit different. So to do that, I'm going to create a div with a class of item and item toggle. And then inside that, I'll create a label. So we'll need a span with a class of input label. We'll call it awesomeness. And in addition to the span, we're going to create a label in here with a class of toggle. And we don't need this for attribute. And then inside this label, we can add the input, and it needs a class of checkbox because it's technically going to be a checkbox. However, it's going to behave like a toggle. And then in here, we want to type in a div with a class of track. And then we're going to have another div with a class of handle. And the way that that will display is like this little toggle right here. So we can turn on the awesomeness just by tapping on this. So it has a nice little interface that is very mobile friendly. In addition to this, you can also have something called a range, which you do have in HTML. And there's a couple of other form elements that we can do, but we've done enough coding for right now. So let's take care of those in the next video.